Hello, for my presentation I chose to discuss Uyghur oppression in China. The Uyghurs and their plight caught my interest after watching actually an episode of Last Week Tonight where host John Oliver discussed China and Uyghurs. I was surprised that I had never heard of this crisis before, so I began to dig a little deeper. I actually found that China's treatment and imprisonment of Uyghurs has garnered very little attention, partially due to China's suppression of information and partially because of the lack of media coverage. I hope this situation captures your attention as it did mine. It deserves worldwide interest and intervention. In 2017, reports that a possible ethnic cleansing of a religious minority in China was underway. Some sources consider this an ethnic genocide perpetuated by the Chinese Communist Party, and quite possibly the largest imprisonment of a peoples based solely on religion since the Holocaust. Approximately 10 million Uyghurs live in the autonomous zone of Xinjiang, China. It is suspected that between 1 to 3 million Uyghurs are being detained in concentration, labor, and re-education camps. The reality of this crisis has been difficult to pin down. Initially, the Chinese government outright denied these accusations. More recently, they claim that these are repatriation institutes designed to help the Uyghurs assimilate to Chinese society. I want to cover the three main topics in this presentation. First, I want to discuss who the Uyghurs are, including their history and their identity. Second, what is the current situation? How did the relationship between Beijing and the Uyghurs bring us to the present-day situation? What is the Chinese Communist Party doing to Uyghurs, and how have they kept it under wraps? Lastly, I also want to discuss how this crisis is being dealt with globally and what the world can do to address these atrocities. The Uyghurs are mentioned in Chinese records dating back to the 3rd century. They were prosperous peoples with an empire that existed along the Orhan River in modern-day north-central Mongolia between the 8th and 9th centuries. They're actually one of the oldest Turkic-speaking peoples of Central Asia, and they are actually predominantly Muslim. In the 18th century China, a mixed Xinjiang, which included the vast majority of Uyghurs. Hostilities between Uyghurs and Beijing have existed since this annexation. There have been many revolts by the Uyghurs, including a declaration of independence in 1933. This movement was quickly crushed by China. Over time, Chinese moved into the Xinjiang region, and tensions between Han Chinese and Uyghurs were high due to the economic disparities between the two. In July of 2009, a particularly violent outbreak actually occurred, resulting in approximately 200 dead and 1,700 injured. Most of these were Han Chinese, and Uyghurs resorted to terrorist-type tactics, including even suicide bombers. Beijing did even classify these clashes as terrorist attacks by Uyghurs. This resulted in establishing invasive checkpoints, placing thousands of security cameras throughout the province on streets and buildings, constant police patrols, shootings, arrests, long prison sentences, usually without evidence of wrongdoing or any sort of due process. In 2017, China began imprisoning Uyghurs in camps. It is estimated that between 1 and 3 million Uyghurs have been imprisoned without charges or a trial. China initially denied these claims, but due to outside pressure, they had to actually offer up some explanations. The Chinese Communist Party has claimed that these camps are designed to help Uyghurs assimilate into Chinese society. They claim that they provide Mandarin lessons in lieu of the Uyghur native tongue and offer some vocational training. The Chinese government says these centers are necessary to deter the terrorist activities that were previously happening. Recently, select journalists have been allowed into these camps. These tours have been scripted, choreographed, and those allowed to enter are heavily restricted from access to most areas, and they are obviously watched very closely by the police while they're there. What visitors are welcome to see mostly includes very well scripted classroom lessons, attentive students, singing, dancing. Despite this, satellite images and some inside reports are obviously it all tells a much different and darker story. The guidelines for targeting Uyghurs consist of rather common activities. Something as simple as not smoking, drinking alcohol, or having a beard induces scrutinization and even imprisonment. The reality is slowly being uncovered. The Uyghur reality, basically in the Journal of Political Risk, an article titled Break Their Roots, journalist Adrian Zenz uncovered disturbing details of what is actually really happening in these concentration camps. While Chinese officials claim that voluntary detentions help Uyghurs become successful Chinese citizens, Zenz unearthed documents that show Uyghur children are malnourished, uneducated, and even in poor hygienic condition. He found that detainees are indoctrinated in Chinese Communist Party beliefs and secured in centralized boarding facilities. Even in a NBC documentary, another journalist, Keir Simmons, was allowed to tour a detention facility with an escort. He noted that every classroom he was shown had students that appeared to be awaiting a visit. He also noted that all students were expected to pledge allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. In most cases, visitors were forced to delete video evidence prior to departure. What is being done? Little is publicly known about the Uyghur crisis, as we've already spoken about. Limited media coverage and lies from inside China's government are partially responsible for this. Politics is also a big factor in the lack of action being taken. Human rights organizations have taken notice, but with much of the world focused on other issues, the public has not. Some U.S. lawmakers introduced a bill in Congress and the Senate called the Uyghur Human Rights Act. On June 17th, this year, 2020, President Trump signed this bill into law. Unfortunately, in the hopes of signing a trade deal with China, the Trump administration postponed any actions that could be taken. What may be even more unfortunate is the silence from Muslim nations such as Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. All of these Middle Eastern nations are major traders with China. So what can be done? First, the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party towards an ethnic minority needs more public exposure. Knowledge is powerful. If more people were aware of this story, more outrage would be displayed. Protests do occur, however, the lack of media attention shows there is obviously not nearly enough. If people don't have information, they will not show up in support. The veil of lies from China needs to be permeated. Worldwide understanding and outrage needs to lead to political pressure being put on the Chinese Communist Party. So what type of political pressure would work? China is obviously a huge world power. Most nations rely on China for goods, services, which makes them reluctant to act. China has a history of pushing back against sanctions and ignoring diplomatic approaches. I do believe that the more the people of the world know, the more pressure they will put on their home nations to act. If these atrocities are well proven and well distributed, there would be a need to act. All possibilities must be on the table. Strict and crippling sanctions from nations across the world will send a message to Chinese leaders. These sanctions must be adhered to despite negative backlash from China. Then the doors to a diplomatic approach can open. Let's get this crisis noticed, and let's end this Uyghur oppression. Feel free to watch the videos at the end. Thank you.